Yeah, I love it. Hello, everyone. I hope you're having a great week at the World Economic Forum. One of the big critiques of the international trading system as it's existed over the last several decades is that part of it has led to an exacerbation of inequality. And one of the big questions globally is, can we reimagine the global trading system and put human beings at the center of the new trading system? And what could such a human-centered trading system look like? We'll talk about that here at this session of the World Economic Forum. We have a very distinguished panel of guests. I also want to tell everyone watching online, sitting here, that you can join this conversation. There's a QR code you'll see on that screen. You can use that to join the poll that's going to be the question that's going to be asked. And you can also go on the Slido app. So the question for this particular session is, on the whole, on balance, do you think that trade improves or worsens social equity? You can choose between improve and worsen, and then tell us what you think, and then we'll have the results up in just a moment. You can use the hashtag social trade and join in, send us your questions, and we'll add those to this panel as well. Let me introduce you to our panelists, starting from my immediate left, Rita Jo Lewis, President of the Export-Import Bank of the United States. Of the Consumers International here in Switzerland, works globally with a lot of NGOs, will give us a sense of how we can put consumer rights at the heart of some of these questions. Cenk Alper is the Chief Executive Officer of Sabanki Holdings in Turkey, exports to different continents, and ultimately it comes down to what corporates can do to try and help bring in some of these changes. Also, last but not least, Arantxa González-Laya, Dean at the Paris School of International Affairs. And I'll start with you, Arantxa. If you can lay out a vision for what you think a human-centered trading system could look like, how would you define it? And then we can work across stakeholders to try and understand what it would take to get there.
Thank you very much, and thank you also for this very opportune moment to talk about something that bothers lots of people and that we need to unpack. Trade, for a start, is a means to an end. It's not an end to itself, and this is the beginning of this conversation. So trade, what it does, it opens opportunities. It creates openness. When you do a trade agreement, you reduce barriers to trade. And with that, you create incredible amount of opportunities that didn't exist before, that you can use now. But if you want to use these opportunities, you're going to need more than trade rules to get there. So I'm really happy that Frida is sitting here, because you're going to need her work. You're going to need export credits to make your trade opportunities turned into possibilities, into realities. So trade rules create opportunities. That is what makes trade possible. You then need to make trade happen. And that's trade finance, and that is trade intelligence. Where is Chen going to send her stuff? He needs to know which market is buying which products, what do consumers want. And we should not stop there. We should also ensure that we have a system where trade works for all. Now that is not in the hands of the trade negotiators or the trade ministries. That's in the hands of the finance ministries, education ministries, fiscal policies, investments in infrastructure. And the problem we have is putting all these things together to make trade much more human-centered and putting the man, the woman, the SME, the indigenous community, the disadvantaged community also at the center of the policy. But basically it's about trade talking much more with the rest of the government agencies to make it work.
Rita, do you want to give us some sense of how you're working towards making trade more human-centered, and by making finance available not just to big companies that will get it very quickly, but to marginalized communities or women or smaller companies, micro companies that will find it tougher to be part of the global trading system?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for this panel today. I think we are really at a major moment in the discussions around how more individuals are going to be a part of everyday economy. And so I hear you loud and clear. I totally agree with what you're saying. I would tell you, the way I try to look at it is that we have to have an economy that actually works for everybody. We then have to have trade, like you said, that benefits everybody. And then, but who is everybody? And so in the US, we're talking about how we have crafted foreign policy that works for the middle class. And I say it's not just the middle class, it's those who are in the middle class, want to be in the middle class, and want to move beyond the middle class. And so it's an exciting time, I believe, to be at USXM, because we do have the kinds of tools that the average individual may not know about. But as an independent government agency, what I'm always out advocating is that there is no deal, no transaction too small or too large for XM Bank. And when I say small, we use the Small Business Administration's definition. And going to your point about how do we make it more human-centered, being at XM at this, in this era right now is, I have a mandate that small business has to have, we make ourselves, our financing available for small business. But we break it down. It's not just small business. It's about women. It's about minorities. It is about, like you said, underserved communities, tribal communities. It's about veterans. It's about LGBT. We have to set the table so that it is bigger, so that folks feel like they can come to a government agency, one that they may not be totally familiar with, but yet understand that there is a welcome mat out there for them.
So has the finance that you've made available for some of these communities actually gone up? Because one of the things that somebody told me as we were preparing for this session is that everyone says the right things, but in the end, when it comes to ensuring that money and finance is available, the needle is not really moving on that.
Well, I would say we rose 10%. During a pandemic. It was 2020, but in 2021, we went up 10% in terms of the money that we were making available. And of that money, $381 million of that went to minority and women-owned business. So I think the proof is in the data, and that's why I'm very data-driven around everything that we do. Because going to your direct point, when I testify before Congress and they say, what has XM done in these particular areas, it has to be driven by those numbers. But more importantly, it's not just the numbers, the people in the communities have to know that we are there for them. And so we're being very aggressive about how do we go to local communities now? How do we bring in local stakeholders? How do we bring in our state and local leaders? Because they are a lot of our governors and mayors and chief ministers and mayors around the world. They are the economic drivers in their communities. And to be able to let them know that the table is there for them to pull their seat up and say, look, I have an idea, I have a product, I have a service, and can XM be one of the solutions that I can come to? Of course, always we have to be, what do they say, they have to offer a reasonable rate of insurance, and we have to be additional to the transaction. We can't, crowd out anything on the private financing side. But the thing that we all know and this is all data-driven, access to capital is the biggest problems that women and minorities have. And so when you look at a federal government agency like an export credit agency like XM, it's a tool that a lot of people don't know. And that's one of the reasons why in my first several months, I have made it a very purposeful to be out and about in the Ohios, out in California, just coming back from Georgia. We are really on the road to say, how do we take our small business, our small business tools, whether it's guarantees or export credit insurance or direct loans, how do we take what we have and showcase that? And part of that is we've got to go to non-traditional audiences. We can't just use the same audiences to tell the story, because most of them pretty much know, kind of like preaching to the choir. we've got to go to me, we've got to go into institutions that may have never, ever thought about coming to a federal government agency or XM for that matter. And that ranges from you know, where are entrepreneurs? Where are executives? Where are the new innovators? Whether it's young entrepreneurs, whether it's diaspora communities, whether it's religious leaders who every day have all these individuals in their churches, mostly a lot who are businesses. We've got to go to women organizations and many, many more.
Okay. Sankalpa, revenues matter, profit matters, employees matter, but in your list of priorities, how significant is fair trade? And where does human-centered trade lie in your vision of what you're trying to achieve?
Okay. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to a great panel with this great panelist. In business environments, in business society, we like to work with models. And right now on climate emergency, there is an excellent model, scoping. So scope 1, the carbon emissions under our roof. Scope 2, in our supply chain. Scope 3 is the consumers or where our products are being used. I think we can use the same model for human-centered trade. So if we divide the problem into 3 for scope 1, what do we do for our employees? So first of all, COVID proved that leaving no one behind was the biggest issue during COVID. And right now, with changing professions and expectations from our workers, with strategic planning, reskilling and upskilling of our employees is extremely critical. Unionization, minimum wage guarantees are extremely critical. Also, you know, creating, like you said, equal opportunities to minorities, to gender differences. They are extremely important within our umbrella. If you go to scope 3, supply chain, I think with ESG principles, we can force all our suppliers to improve their social standards, working standards. And I think digitalization plays an extremely important role over there. If we can digitize the whole supply chain, if we can make data transparent to whole supply chain, I think it will help the fair trade. Right now, all the digital platforms and digital marketplaces are great opportunities to create fair trade, because with digital platforms, we can train people for different competencies all over the world. With digital marketplaces, local producers, merchants can directly access to consumers. So that's create a fair trade approach. And the digital platforms or marketplaces are transparent places where you can fairly compete with others. So those are great opportunities. Last but not least, within our supply chains, as what we do in-house, reskilling, upskilling, we can apply the same methodologies to our suppliers, to our agents, to our dealers. We can force the inequality problem standards also throughout the supply chain. Finally, innovation is extremely critical. And today, through venture capitals, through seed funds from from business society, I think wherever you are, if you have a good idea, if you are a real entrepreneur, you can find a capital and you can access to knowledge, how to bring your idea to industry, to the markets, and then how to grow. So those are great opportunities or models that I think we can support free human-centered trade through private sector.
Are you laying emphasis on your supply chains to see how equitable they are? Because that's a very critical factor.
Yes.
Are you making some special allowances? Rita just spoke of how they're trying to ensure that finance is available to micro companies, to women, to people from certain castes and communities. Is that at all a priority for you in the private sector?
Yes, of course. Of course, it's a real priority because collaboration is extremely important in private sector, and we do have to do this collaboration through our supply chains, innovation together. And we create not only financing opportunities, but also competency development or knowledge opportunities.
Elena, how do you think we can possibly embed consumer rights in our trading systems, and how would you define what human-centered trade should look like from a consumer perspective?
Thank you. Yeah, so to explain to those who aren't sort of familiar with Consumers International, we're a network of NGOs in 100 countries around the world. You know, consumer advocacy exists in Uganda as well as Ukraine, Uruguay, Bhutan. You know, it's part of a thriving economy. And what's really interesting is there's a common understanding of what a consumer essential need is. And so when I was thinking about this, I was really struggling, because I'm like, how come trade has not started with people? So let's start with what the legitimate essential needs of people in the marketplace are. And those are access, protection of the vulnerable, safety, their economic interests, but then they go on. Information and education, redress and representation, promotion of sustainable consumption patterns, online protection that's as good as that you find in the traditional marketplace, and then privacy and data flows. Now, all of the UN member states agreed to these, and they form the basis of consumer policy. And yet they're disconnected from, you know, it's almost, they were put in place in 1985. That feels like a long time ago, but we're nowhere there. So if you built those in, what would it look like? Can we build trust by design as we think about the way in which trade evolves going forward? The thing is, right now, you know, let's take e-commerce as an example. You can see some of those sort of essential needs. We're at greater risk. Now, number one, vulnerability and economic interests right now, horrific. I mean, absolutely devastating from multiple perspectives. And yet, the way in which people are defined as vulnerable is totally different in different places. So how do we actively respond to their needs quickly, right? Product safety. Actually, the number of product, now this may be in the world of business, that could be counterfeiting or it could be something else. I don't care, I'm a consumer, it's not safe. You know, so the extent to which product safety is becoming an issue online, another thing. The extent to which I actually get the information I need for the products, you know, and it's not just a lack of information. In a world where we need to put in place sustainable consumption patterns, why aren't we really leaning into what sustainable living looks like and how it links with trade? That is very much about the future of humanity. Representation, you know, we lay these things out as the e-commerce, as the 80 countries thought about the future of e-commerce at the WTO, we laid out, all right, well, what might these things look like in e-commerce? But the ability to be involved in those conversations, the ability to give feedback does not exist. Understand many reasons why, but it is very difficult then to work to put the person in the marketplace back into that conversation and then land it back with folks who are making complaints to consumer advocates in their country, you know. And then I think the sort of things like redress, and we are not seeing the level of international collaboration. We look very much to the international system to be thinking about this and then supporting and making this much easier for the consumer. Whether, Arantxa, you talked about the incoherency of policy. You know, let's take between agriculture, health, and trade. You know, that lands back with the consumer at the end of the day. Lack of investment into online redress that crosses borders, so that, you know, I can trust that system. There is so much there to build. So we come at it perhaps from a less technical perspective. We're very much like, we want to see a thriving marketplace, but this is what's happening for the person who's sitting in the marketplace and sort of thinking about, well, what does this mean?
You know, we asked everyone watching online, sitting here in this hall, to respond to the questions. I'm going to call up the answers. The question was, does trade improve or worsen social equity on the whole. So if you responded on Slido, you still could. We have the responses out. 80% are saying that they believe that trade on a whole increases social equity. Is that backed by data, Arantxa? Because while nations have got richer, there are lots of people who feel that all the trade that's happening, whether it's merchandise, exports, the benefits aren't really coming down to them.
I think it's very interesting. This answer varies depending on where you pose the question.
That's true.
Having during this WEF 2022, I've been meeting with lots of people in Asia, and they see trade as the engine that has pulled millions out of poverty. So they want to see more trade, and they think globalization is good, because it has allowed them to improve their standards of living. Now they are in the middle classes and they can buy mobile phones and they can travel around, they can go to school and they can get a job. Now, if you ask this question, maybe in North Dakota, maybe, or if you ask this question in, let me just not to pick on Frida, but closer to where I am, maybe in Lyon, maybe the answer is not going to be that one. And even within the same country, maybe if you ask in California, the answer is going to be different to North Dakota.
Sure.
And in Lyon, it's going to be different from Madrid, even if the trade policy is the same. So what does this tell us? That trade rules on their own will not make this equitable distribution of the impact be fair. That we need more than trade rules, that the trade rules need to ensure safety, security, they need to ensure sustainability, they need to ensure no discrimination, including between men and women, by the way, which is not written in the rules today. But we need more than the trade rules for trade to be equitable. And that's what governments need to hear over and over again. Because if they do not pull all the levers they have at hand, then there's going to be many people that will be affected by the changes that open markets create on them. They're going to be hurt, and if there is no answer for them, they are going to resent it, and the answer will be 80% no, 20% yes. So we want this to be as close as possible to 100%.
So trading systems are largely imagined as being entrenched, but on account of some of the changes that we're seeing globally, the trading system is being reimagined largely because of the push towards digitization. So Arantxa, I think Seng made that point about how digitization can play the role of a leveler. It could also have the complete opposite impact, where it gets concentrated in the hands of a few big tech companies and the smaller companies don't find an equal level playing opportunity. How can the new push towards digitization be ensured in a way that it actually makes trade more level playing field rather than skewing it further towards big corporations?
So first, the theory, of course, on the theory, what the digital economy gives you is that it reduces intermediation. It helps you disintermediate, and it levels the playing field. So it doesn't matter where you are. It doesn't matter where you produce. It doesn't matter how big or small you are. You can still access markets. That's what the digital economy allows you to do. And let's not think that selling online is only selling products. You can also sell ideas. Mm-hmm. You can also sell services, which are travel even faster. But is this enough? No, of course. If you're sitting in a country where you've got no internet connectivity, or if your connectivity is very low, or if you don't get credit to expand your production, or if you don't have a laboratory to check that the food that you produce in your kitchen and you can now sell online is certified as being safe. So back to square number one. The digital economy, in theory, is an incredible leveler for every operator to be part of the market. But you need more than that for it to happen.
Rita, your thoughts on digitization and how it could either make it a more level playing field or have the opposite effect?
Because one, it's almost available to everyone, even though we have made major investments largely in rural communities, largely in minority communities. We're seeing that that can help level the playing field so that everybody can have access to technology. If they have access to technology, they can do anything, they can be anywhere, they can learn anything. It's all up to them. One of the things that, when you look at human-centered trade and you think about, and I use, if we think about the word export, the minute you say that, people start like thinking that's not them, or they immediately become fearful of something that they don't realize that really could be a positive. What I like to say is that we need to be talking about jobs. How can we create jobs? And so when you have an agency that is mission, it is to facilitate exports in the support of good-paying jobs and good-paying union jobs, then to me, you can have more people in a community start thinking more on a positive scale, because so many communities throughout all of our countries feel like workers and communities have been left behind. But what we have done from a domestic perspective in the United States, which is not a departure from our mission, is that most recently we passed an initiative called Make More in America, because we believe we need to make more in America, we need to export more from America, but importantly, we need to have more commercial partnerships, not only from the private sector, but also with like-minded countries, because everyone is feeling the same insecurity. So, but when you start talking about the creation of a job, and you've got some financing tools that will allow, for us, it's about domestic manufacturing, having the ability in the United States to be able to obtain some of the financing tools that we have to grow it or expand their business. All they need to have is an export nexus. And if they have an export nexus, that means that some of these places that may have felt like they've been left behind, people will now begin to say, with that tool with that financing tool, which is only complementary, it's not the whole ball game, but with that complementary tool, maybe I can begin to look at communities that I've never looked at before and place my facilities there. If I can also, if there's a government program along coupled with complementary other, lending that they may be able to obtain. Now, more, I think communities can feel like maybe we can be a part of something, because people are now going in to talk with these leaders, these local leaders, in a whole different way. Because you want to make sure, I think, that what I've seen across the board, I just came back from Atlanta, Georgia, and I looked out in an audience filled with women and minorities of all sectors that were anxious to be a part of this new economy. And to be a part of this new economy, digital, I think, and digital services is going to play a big role in that.
Saying you want to build on your idea that digitization provides a great level playing field, and how could it be built on even further to ensure that everybody has an equal opportunity to be part of the benefits of trade?
I think digitization itself is extremely important through marketplaces. And yes, I agree that there are giant digital companies right now managing, but what we see as a trend that marketplaces in certain verticals or even idea generation, NGOs are coming up. That's critical. But what allowed fair trade is also the improvement in logistics and last mile delivery systems. Because you can put any picture, any photograph of your products to internet, but to guarantee the safety of the products, you should be able to deliver them. And if there is a complaint from the consumer, you should be able to get it back, replace it, etc. So there are two parallel developments in the business world. One is digitalization, but second one is the support systems through logistics, through last mile delivery. So as we improve this all over the world, I think this will improve human-centered trade everywhere.
We live, Elena, in an era of growing consumerism which is driven by consciousness. And in this, do you think putting out labels, something as basic as putting out labels for fair trade, would make a difference because these conscious consumers then pick and want to be part of a movement which they think serves socioeconomic indicators better?
There's a lot to unpack in that question. First, I want to just reflect this point about safety in the digital trade.
Sure.
Take digital finance, brilliant for access, brilliant for disrupting markets, huge potential. With digital finance, you start seeing things that become greater risks for consumers if you don't consider those upfront. Buy now, pay later. Fantastic, exciting, gives people more access, but when people become more constrained and need to buy essentials with buy now, pay later, and we haven't got the safety and the redress mechanism to back it up. Mm-hmm. So it's exactly the same between physical products and also the services side of this as well. And your point about feedback, I mean, we've just set up a platform for consumer advocates in low and middle income countries to be able to talk to their governments about how digital finance is being built with consumer input. How do we shape that for the future? Now, right, I think we need to reclaim the idea of being a consumer. We are all people in a marketplace. How is that working for us? It doesn't have to be consumerism. That's become something, I think, because of a mix of a way of marketing that we learned in the past. It's not true all around the world at all. I think there are new norms we can put in place. Yes, labels are one of the many things that we can do. Now, if you think about how we provide information to people, that you get information as a consumer in many different ways. A label can be, for some people, if it is third-party verified, really backed by data, it can be helpful in some ways. For some people. Right now, there are just 100 different labels that people have to look at. And so we're loading the burden of trying to make the choice on the consumer. We're not making it easy for people. So there are opportunities to come way back in the system, sort of harmonize, set some standards. Consumer advocates would even say pre-approve certain, things that can be said, certain labels before they can go out there. How do we make sustainability irresistible? If that's the case, is a great question. I would argue back, though, informing consumers is not the only way forward. We can't just inform people, give them a QR code, expect them to pay more, and off they go. This transition to a sustainable form of consumption, people want it, they will fight for it. We have to make it possible for them and involve them in that change. And that's a much bigger conversation, but a fascinating one to have, as we think about what a digital, but a sustainable. Digital is there to help us get to a sustainable future.
So we'll throw this panel open for questions. If anyone sitting here has a question, you can put your hand up. There are people who've sent questions as well on the app, and I can take some of those questions to begin with while you think of what questions you have. Let's take the question about we used to say that money has no nationality in the globalizing world, but do a nation's own priorities actually hinder free trade in today's world? And the idea, Arantxa, that some of the notions of human-centered trade could possibly make trade more uncompetitive. Is that a real apprehension or just a ruse?
This is exactly the same discussion we have had about sustainability, with those saying that a company that needs to invest in sustainability this is going to be so costly that it will erode competitiveness. Well, actually, the contrary is the reality. Companies that are more sustainable, in the end, are also more competitive. So it's the same. You don't have to, there is no trade-off between being more competitive by being less human-focused. That is not a trade-off that I think we can accept. We have to accept that you can be extremely competitive by not discriminating in your value chain, by not discriminating between your woman and men supplier, by making sure that smaller companies are incorporating into your value chain. Why should this
But
region
will
do-
not discriminating be enough to deliver the required outcomes, or will special allowances have to be made, whether it's by governments or by corporates, to ensure that those who don't have or haven't traditionally had an equal opportunity are then able to become part of the trading system?
Well, do that. Train your traders properly. Give them information. Facilitate access to credit. Give them the knowledge that they need of markets. You don't need to trade downwards. Your ambition should be to trade upwards.
This fear saying that as companies focus more, if they focus more on human-centered trade, it could possibly make those products more uncompetitive than those who are ruthless in taking cold calls on what they need to do to ensure that their bottom line is in order.
I agree to Arantxa. It's like sustainable. There is one single word. As right now we are breathing and we are polluting altogether. I think the issue is between developing countries and developed countries. Most of the inequalities that we are talking about, yes, in developed countries we are talking about gender inequalities, but actually if we look, there are national inequalities between developed and developing countries. Are we ready to give up some of our comforts for the world, for a better planet? Or are we ready, for example, right now with the Ukraine-Russian crisis, what we see, a food crisis? Are we ready to give up some part of our meal to starving people all around the world? That's the issue. Yes, access to information, access to digitalization, human-centered traits is very important, but most critical thing right now is the economic nationalism.
Adding to that, I think when we're talking about human-centered trade, we really are talking about how we are advancing equity across the board. Because if you really start to take the individual into consideration, it's not people in a mass group, it's person by person. And with that, from a leadership perspective, and I'm excited to be in an administration where day one, the leader Biden comes out talking about how he wants to advance equity across the board in everything we do, looking at how federal government also spends its money, looking at how federal government also hires its people, looking at how federal government contracts, and putting in place the rules and the executive orders to say this is a presidential executive order, and then more importantly, holding people accountable. Because if you don't hold people accountable, you're never going to get there. And so in that accountability, it makes all of us have to lead. And you have to lead, I think, with human-centered trade, you got to lead from the front. It's like the military. You got to lead from the front. You can't lead from behind. And that really is all about leadership. And so you're right. We don't want to just keep talking about it. We want to be putting things in place that we can see the manifestation that change can happen. And when you see change happen, I think people become less fearful, and then they want to participate. Because at the end of the day, what I have found is people just want access. They want access to opportunity. They want access to new markets. They want to be able to know that it's there for them. And if it's there for them, they can go out there and find it. And people, we all of us, I think, we just don't know where the next great idea is going to come from. We don't know where the next great idea is going to come from. We don't know where the next great service is going to come from. We don't even know where the next great product is going to come from. And who are those individuals that's going to do that? And if we place more of an emphasis on individuals, and I think young people are demanding that we place more emphasis on individuals, then I think across the board, we can see sustainable change.
I think Alper spoke of economic nationalism, and we're seeing those winds blow in different countries, whether it's in the United States, whether it's in India, elsewhere. Arantxa, your sense of how this could, each government, when it does any idea of economic nationalism, is doing so in the hope that they're making the lot of their people better, taking care of those humans, but are you fearful that this could actually end up having the opposite effect?
Well, I think it is natural that every country wants to improve the standards of living of their people. This is natural. And I would not find any question mark about any government wanting to make their people better. The question is how you do that. And what history has proven is that if you do this through trade protectionism, it's not going to work. Whereas if you do it through protecting your workers, protecting their standards of living, protecting and promoting, including through an open market, their lives, that can work. So, you know, I think the evidence is out there. Doing it through trade protectionism, we've just seen that it doesn't work because you use trade protectionism, your neighbor will do the same to you. And then both of you will be worse off. Whereas if you work to empower them, I mean, I think this is a big issue to go back to what you were saying, Frida. This is a big issue in the US. This is why I think what President Biden is trying to do to get more financing to invest in infrastructure, to invest in education, to invest in innovation, that goes in the right direction because that is what will empower the citizens, protect them and help them navigate a changing economic landscape. What will not work is just simply using the good old trade protectionism because that just, you know, leads to tit for tat and then everyone is worse off.
We'll take more audience questions. There's a very interesting idea on accountability and who takes the onus to try and make this happen. And the questions to do with that are today's multilateral institutions equipped to take action on building a trading system that's more human-centered? And if so, which one? Is this rather a national priority, local priority, global priority? It's one thing to sit here and talk about this, but who makes this happen? Elena, you want to take this?
So consumer policy sits with UNCTAD. You know, this is where the consumer policy guidelines are, and you know, the next opportunity for that revision, I really think that's a great opportunity to elevate the voice of the consumer, to make sure that it's docking effectively with, you know, energy policy, you know, all of the food policy, the way in which, you know, our experience as consumers, as people in the marketplace, actually reflects the sort of the shifts there. Having said that, so that I would say is a really important moment to make sure we're fit for the future. Of course, it's not only there. You know, if you think about where this needs to happen, it's a multitude of places that we need a little bit more of a joined-up approach. You know, consumer advocates are not necessarily invited into the conversations where things that their interests are directly impacted. The places where businesses discuss this, the place where large and small and medium-sized enterprises are discussed, those things are not joined up. And you end up with some really sort of strange examples where, for example, what's discussed at the WTO on privacy can actually counteract what's discussed on privacy in the EU, for example. So I would say those places do not exist, but we have the starting points, and you know it will take a really, you know, urgent joined-up conversation to start bringing some of this together.
Rita, who takes the onus?
I think it's a global problem. It's an issue where it's going to take like-minded countries coming together who share the same values. I think that's what President Biden tried to do in the whole global infrastructure initiative. When you find the fact that every one of those leaders is trying to make the lives of their citizens better, exactly what she put forth. And to be able to do that, it makes some of these things that are happening around the world, some of these very large, especially these iconic infrastructure projects, one person, one company, one country might not be able to do it alone. It is going to take a combination of partnerships, and that is what I'm excited about, to be able to see the partnerships that can go on that take place around like-minded countries that come together to try to find solutions, solve a problem to make the lives of their citizens better.
And I'll take one last question from those who are sending us questions in the app, and this is to do with how much of the onus can corporates take? Because, for example, on your supply chain, beyond, say, tier 1 suppliers, to what extent would companies be willing to check for whether the rights of workers are actually being taken care of? And can a company like yours be expected to take responsibility for that and change their supply chains to ensure that there is diversity and rights are taken care of?
Yes, we have to do, because in the whole economic world right now, financial system, the metrics of success are changing from profit to ESG metrics. So we have to take care of the environment, we have to take care of the society, we have to take care of our governance. Okay? And in that, you know, the scope, we are responsible in our supply chain to bring environmental and social standards to a higher level. And in the financial community, in the investor community, we will be penalized or rewarded accordingly. IFRS right now is working on the new system. So it's not profit anymore. So to me, the winning thing, let's finish this with a good spirit. I think every company, every NGO, or country, we should move from profits to purpose. And if we can move to purpose, I think at the end we can find a common ground to improve the lives of people everywhere in the world.
And if we have to ensure that the blowback against global trade decreases rather than increases, then trying to put humans at the center of the trading system is the way to go, and also ensure that purpose doesn't remain an idea, but it's something that even outside a conversation, stakeholders work towards. So we've had an insightful conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate your time. Enjoy the evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.